This Maimed is about Teshuvah. So we'll start with some stories. There's a story which is quite famous actually. It's brought in Falakan's Maisis, in Shmuas V'Sipurim, I believe. It's an involved story. And the story basically is that the Baal Shem Tov had a Talmud, I think his name was Rabbi Yankiv, who had always been with the Baal Shem Tov. He had the schus to always be together with his Rebbe. And he had opportunity to observe the Baal Shem Tov from up close for long periods of time. He traveled on many trips with him, and he witnessed many miracles and so on. Before the Baal Shem Tov passed away, the Baal Shem Tov spoke to each one of his Talmidim and he gave them instructions. And to this Talmud, Rabbi Yankiv, the Baal Shem Tov said, I want you to travel around and tell stories about me. And he said to him, you should continue doing this until you'll get a remez, till you'll get a hint that you can stop. So after the Baal Shem Tov's histalkus, the Baal Shem Tov's passing, this Rabbi Yankiv traveled from place to place and he told stories of the Baal Shem Tov. Clearly, he didn't get rich telling Baal Shem Tov stories. People wanted to hear stories of the Baal Shem Tov and they paid, but nobody paid him millions. And he scratched out a living, or maybe didn't even scratch out a living. He traveled from place to place telling stories of the Baal Shem Tov. This was his thing. He came to a city, people came together and he told stories. At a certain point, he heard a rumor, he heard a shmua, that there's a Yid very far away, let's say in Romania, someplace like that, who's very well-to-do, is very rich, and he has a great affinity for Baal Shem Tov stories, and anybody who will tell him a Baal Shem Tov story which he has not heard, he'll pay him a large amount of money. So this Rabbi Yankiv thought to himself, for him this is a windfall. He has to tell stories of the Baal Shem Tov. This way he could have some parnasa as well. So he made his way to this city, to this country, to the city where this very well-to-do Jew lived. And he announced himself as a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov, and that he would like to be in this person's house and tell stories of the Baal Shem Tov and so on. The man greeted him unbelievably warmly. He invited him to his home. He had a very large house, which accommodated many guests, but he had one guest room which was exclusive, which was prepared for the most choshev guest, the most honorable guests, and this Rabbi Yankiv was given that suite, that space, and he stayed in this man's house, and he said to him, Shabbos is going to come, I'll invite the whole city, and then you'll tell stories of the Baal Shem Tov. Friday night came, and there was a dinner, there was a Friday night meal. At the end of the meal, many Yidden from that city came to join this Gvir, this rich Jew, at his table to hear stories from Rabbi Yankiv. Finally, this Gvir turns to Rabbi Yankiv, this rich Jew turns to Rabbi Yankiv and says, okay, now with your turn, tell us stories of the Baal Shem Tov. So Rabbi Yankiv opens his mouth and not a single story comes out. He can't remember a single story of the Baal Shem Tov. A Yid who had spent years with the Baal Shem Tov is suddenly blank, storyless. He couldn't believe himself. He was shocked by his own failure to come up with stories, and he began to stammer and he began to stutter. And he apologized and he says, I don't know why, but I can't remember a single story. And he became very apologetic, very self-conscious. He felt very bad for himself and for the rich person and for all the people that came, but of course he was very ashamed. But the rich man was very, very understanding and very, very accommodating. The rich man told him, listen, you must be tired. Tomorrow's another day. Tomorrow there'll be a meal of Shabbos day. People will come back and you'll tell your stories. Then you shouldn't worry about it. Don't eat your heart out and so forth. Rabbi Yankiv went back to his room, to his suite, and he didn't sleep a minute. To him, the idea that he cannot remember stories of the Baal Shem Tov was so disturbing that his world was shaken. And the whole night he did some soul searching, he did teshuvah. Hard to know how you do teshuvah on Shabbos, but nevertheless that's how the story is told. And obviously he came to shul in the morning exhausted. Came the meal of Yom Shabbat, the second meal of Shabbos, and again many people came to the house of this rich man to hear stories, and at the end of the meal he turned to Rabbi Yankov and said, no, maybe Rabbi Yankov have a story now, and Rabbi Yankov says, I can't remember a single story. And the entire event repeated itself again. Rabbi Yankov was very, very self-conscious. He felt terrible, he felt ashamed. He felt like he looks like a thief, like he's dishonest, even though it was true that he was a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov. And he said, I can't remember any stories. And the Oisher, the Gvir, was very, very understanding and said, don't worry, you must be nervous. Shalashudis will be soon. There'll be a third opportunity. People will gather and you tell stories of the Baal Shem Tov. Came Shalashudis, and the same thing repeated itself again. Understandably, that afternoon he didn't sleep at all. And when it came to Shalashudis, and again the Oisher, the Gvir, the rich man, turns to him and says, Nu, tell up some Maaseh from the Baal Shem Tov. And he says, I can't remember any and I feel terrible. You must think I'm a thief. You must think I'm a lowlife. You must think I'm a deceiver. But it's really, really true that I was with the Baal Shem Tov. And for the life of me, I cannot understand what happened to my memory. Well, I can't remember any stories. Shabbos ended. And again, the Balabas told him, after Shabbos will be Malava Malki. And this time he said, no, I feel so bad that I made you provide me with all these accommodations based on the premise that I'm going to tell you stories of the Baal Shem Tov. And here the Eibishter was Seisem my Maya, and I can't remember a single story. As soon as the Shabbos is out, I'm leaving. I can't deal with the indignity, I can't deal with the shame, I can't deal with you suspecting me of being dishonest. And the Gvir said, no, you don't understand. I understand and I trust you. You must be going through some inner turmoil. Stay a few days. He asked him to stay till Tuesday. Maybe stories will come to you. And he said, absolutely not. And as soon as Shabbos was over, he left. And the Gvir, the Oisher, provided him a wagon which was going to take him out of the town. And he climbed into the wagon, this Rabbi Yankov. And as he was about to leave, he says, I remember one story. So very quickly they gathered. Rabbi Yankov got out of the wagon, and he went into the house, and he sat down, and before he could forget it, he began to tell the following story. That the Heilige Baal Shem Tov had a custom that he used to travel. As we know, Baal Shem Tov was Isaac ben Asiyas. The Mezritcher Maggid stayed in one place, the Baal Shem Tov traveled to Chanin constantly. And the Seder was that he had a goy coachman, a balagola. And he didn't work too hard, this guy. All he had to do was water the horses and feed the horses. And of course he had to harness them up when time came. But he would sit down on top of that little bench where the balagola sits. The Baal Shem Tov would tell him his name was Alexi, it was his name, Alexi. He would hit the horses, and he would lead the horses out of the city of Mezhebush. As soon as they would leave the town, the Baal Shem Tov would say to him, to Alexi, Lega vek de leitzes, put down the straps, the reins, and he would go to sleep, Alexi would, and the horses went by themselves. And the horses arrived wherever they needed to arrive. Sometimes the Baal Shem Tov traveled alone, sometimes they traveled with one person, sometimes they traveled with 3 people, and sometimes they traveled with a minion. One of the times that was normal for the Baal Shem Tov to travel was Motzei Shabbos. And often, right after Havdalah, he would call in Alexi, we'd climb into the wagon, and we would travel. One Motzei Shabbos, the Baal Shem Tov called his Balagola, Alexi, and he asked a whole minyan of Talmidim should join him on the wagon, and they traveled. And of course, as soon as they would leave the town, the Alexi would put on the reins, and the horses would run, and they would go through fields and wildernesses. They had no idea where they were going and how they were going. They would have Fitzas Haderech. They would end up in very distant places. And on this particular journey, they traveled all through the night. Early in the morning on Sunday, they arrived into a square, into a main road of a city that was essentially sprawling fields and farms that spread out into the countryside. And on this main road, there was a row of houses, of buildings. And opposite the row of buildings was a gigantic amphitheater, an outdoor, like a stadium. And in the row of houses, they had all kinds of different businesses. And as we rode by, we saw that all the businesses were boarded up. The windows were nailed shut with boards, as if these homes were abandoned, or at least they were being protected from some kind of a force. And the wagon, the horses, drove onto the street, and it stopped in front of one particular house. So the Baal Shem Tov says to me, says Rabbi Yankiv, go and knock on the door and tell the host, tell the Balabais that Yisrael Baal Shem Tov is here, the Baal Shem Tov is here, and he wants to come into his house. He knocks on the door. At first nobody answers. Eventually, one of the boards on the second floor is moved and the window is opened a crack, and he hears a whisper of a Yid who's saying to him, go away, there's going to be a pogrom. They're going to kill Jews, go save yourself. You don't want to be here. And he says, I'm a Talmud of the Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, and he is here, and he wants to come into your house. And he says, now is not a good time for visitors, go, leave. And they have this little argument, but of course Rabbi Yankov insists. Eventually the Balabais comes down, opens the door, and tells him that there's a very, very famous preacher, a Galach, who's a very big anti-Semite, and he makes speeches, and his speeches are fire and brimstone, they're very, very passionate. And he rallies, he incites the Goyim, the Christians, against the Jews, and very often after his speeches, there's pogroms. Rahman al-Islam. And this preacher is going to speak at the amphitheater directly across the street that morning. So all the Jews who could left, and those who couldn't boarded up their homes, and they're waiting ad yavezam, hoping that things will end favorably. So he tells them, go. And the Baal Shem Tov says, no, we're coming in. All 10 Talmidim went into this house. The Balabos realized that Baal Shem Tov is not leaving, so he quickly put the horses in the stable. They climbed into the house, and again he boarded everything up. And he told the Baal Shem Tov that this is a very dangerous time to be here, and you have to hide. The Baal Shem Tov, of course, did what the Baal Shem Tov did. He went over to the window and he opened it up. And he sat by the window watching. The host was beside himself, it was ice mensch. But the Baal Shem Tov was the Baal Shem Tov, and he understood that this Baal Shem Tov does what he wishes. So in spite of the fact that he was so nervous, he was so disturbed and so afraid, the Baal Shem Tov sat by the window and watched. As they got closer to the official time for this gathering, people started to come from the nearby farms, all dressed in their Sunday best, all bedecked, whole families, until the entire theater was full, and eventually this Galach came, a big, imposing personality with a great presence and a powerful voice and a very, very great skill at oratory, at public speaking. And he got up and he started to talk. Initially his words were soft and reasonable, and of course, understandably, as his talk went on, he became more involved, more excited. At a certain point, the Baal Shem Tov turns around to me, says Rabbi Yankiv. He says, go across the street, go over to that Galach and tell him that Yisrael Baal Shem Tov is here and he would like to speak to him. When the host saw this, he went into a panic. He says, this is suicide. And it's not only suicide, it's murder, they'll kill all of us. And the Baal Shem Tov told me to go. So I went. I went out of the house, I crossed over the street, and I walked through this entire crowd, and nobody touched me. And I walked straight up to the Galach, and I whispered into his ear, Yisrael Baal Shem Tov is here, and he wants to see you. He stopped talking, and he said to me, tell him I'll come after I finish my speech. And I walked again through the entire crowd. Nobody touched me. I went back into the apartment. I went over to the Baal Shem Tov, and I told the Baal Shem Tov that he said he'll come after he finishes his talk. And the Baal Shem Tov said, no, go back across the street and tell him that I want to speak to him. Yisrael Baal Shem Tov is here, I want to speak to him, and I want to speak to him right now. So I went across the street, and I walked through the entire crowd, and nobody touched me again. And I went over to this Galach, and I whispered in his ear a second time that the Baal Shem Tov said he wants to see him right now. So the Galach followed me. And he left the podium and left the speech, and he walked into the house. We closed the door. The Baal Shem Tov and this Galach went into a room alone and sat together for a very, very long time. The people waited for the Galach to return, and they waited, and they waited, and they waited. He's not coming. So eventually the crowd began to thin, and anything negative that could have occurred was dispelled by the Baal Shem Tov's interruption of the proceedings. What the Baal Shem Tov and this man discussed, we don't know. But we know that from behind the door we could hear terrible crying. And after many hours, the Baal Shem Tov emerged together with this Galach who looked quite exhausted emotionally. And the Galach left, and no one ever heard from him again. This is the story that Rabbi Yankiv told. This was the story. The crowd in the home of this Gvir, his Oisher, is listening with bated breath. It's an interesting story. It's an incredible story. And when he finished telling the story, the impact of the story was felt. You could feel in the room how people are moved by this Ma'aser. Rabbi Shem Tov saved Yidden from what kind of tzaros nobody knows. Suddenly the host, the Balabais, gets up and he says very, very emotionally, ladies and gentlemen, I want to make an announcement. And he says, I want you all to know I am that Galach, I am that priest. And he turns to Rabbi Yankov. And he says to Rabbi Yankov, I want to tell you the rest of the story. You called me to come to the Baal Shem Tov, and I came to the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov began to talk to me. I explained to the Baal Shem Tov who I was. I had been an orphan Jewish child with neither father nor mother, who was a shovev. I was a troublemaker. I got into trouble. And because I was a shovev, and I got into trouble, they used to punish me. One of the methods of punishing me in the shtetl was that they would take a person and put him in a cage next to the shul, and all the people would walk by and spit at him and throw insults at him and belittle him. He says, this is how I grew up. And as I became an adult, I made up my mind that I would never forgive the Jewish people for the indignity that they caused me, and I've dedicated my life to hurting Jews. Baal Shem Tov came, and the Baal Shem Tov touched my pnimius, my pintele, my neshama, and he aroused in me a feeling of tshuva, and I was very moved to do tshuva, which I did. But I said to the Baal Shem Tov, Rebbe, how was it possible that a person like me should ever be able to be forgiven? How can a person like me ever feel like his tshuva is done? I hurt Jewish people. I hurt people. He probably caused the death of many Jews. How is his sin ever forgivable? And moreover, how will he ever know that the Eibishter forgave him for his Avedas? So the Baal Shem Tov said to me that if a man will ever come and he will tell you your story, you will know that you were forgiven. So the Gvir turns to Rabbi Yankov and says, Rabbi Yankov, when you walk into my house, I recognized you immediately. And they understood that this was my moment. And when you came Friday night and you couldn't remember any of the stories and you felt so terrible, understand that as bad as you felt, I felt 100 times as bad. Because I understood that this is a simim min hashamayim that leines kabel tshuvasi. My tshuva was not yet received, my tshuva was not yet adequate, my tshuva was not yet complete. So if you think you didn't sleep Friday night, I certainly didn't sleep last night. I cried and I returned to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and asked for forgiveness. And then when it came Yom Shabbat, the Shabbos day, and you again didn't remember any stories, and you felt so upset. But I knew why you're not remembering any stories. You're not remembering any stories because I'm not ready, I'm not deserving to be forgiven for my Avedas. So I did Shuvah some more. And then of course the same thing happened also at Ivad. When it came Shalosh Shudas, and you remembered no stories, and you thought it had something to do with some kind of a glitch, and I understood it because my tshuva was not received. And now, Baruch Hashem, thank God, by the virtue of the fact that you were able to tell me this story, that's a proof that my tshuva was forgiven, and he thanked Rabbi Yankov very much. And of course, the way the story ends was Rabbi Yankov understood that this was what the Baal Shem Tov had meant all those years before, that he should spend his life traveling stories until he'll get a simim and hashamayim. This was the sign, and he stopped telling stories and he settled down. This is the story. At kan hasipur. Now first, what's the point of telling the story? The story alone. But the story has a lot of interesting aspects. One of the aspects of the story, which is to me very, very important, is this idea of a person saying to the Baal Shem Tov, how do I know I'm forgiven? A person does something wrong, and he corrects it, he does tshuva. How does he know that the Eibishter forgives him? And the Baal Shem Tov said to him, when you'll hear your story again, you'll know the Eibishter forgave you. In Tanya, the Alter Rebbe writes in Perek Chavav at the end, and you also have it in Igeres HaTshuva, Perek Yud Aleph, that you have to believe that the Eibishter forgives and not worry. If you do tshuva and don't believe the Eibishter forgives, it's a big issue on a lot of levels. But this is the first story that I wanted to share, considering the fact that our Maimed, although it's a very involved Maimed, is about Teshuvah. Now I want to tell you a second story, which is much closer to home. There's a sefer that's called HaTraktorist Shel HaRebbe, the Rebbe's tractor driver. This sefer is the biography of a chassid by the name of Reuven Dunen, Rebbe Reuven Dunen, Rav Rebbe Reuven Dunen. Since he's passed away, they've printed several svarim about him and from him and so on. The sefer HaTraktorist Shel HaRebbe is a biography, and the basis for this sefer is a few pages of an autobiography. In other words, the book is a large book with a lot of incredible stories, but there's a small part of it which he wrote himself. I remember reading years ago in the Beis Mashiach magazine that Reuven Dunen revealed his relationship with the Rebbe when he first arrived, the different yechidus, and I understand that he said that the Rebbe didn't give him this much kiruv and so much attention just for himself. He has an obligation to share it with others, and he therefore shared with people his story of Teshuvah. Reuven Dunen's story is a very intense story. It's a powerful story. And I'll just tell you, also Hagdama, that I know a Yid who told me personally that he was in yeshiva in Lud the first year after Reuven came back to yeshiva. Reuven Dunen came from a frum home, from a yeshivish house, a lamdish house. And in 48, when Israel became a Medina, he was lost, became assimilated. But after a few years, Nimaslo, he was disgusted with his former life, and he said to his father he wants to go back to yeshiva. And it's a whole arichas asipur how he went to different yeshivas. He finally came to Lud, and he met Rabbi Chaim. Rabbi Chaim didn't want to take him. It says in the sefer that he realized that Rabbi Chaim wasn't happy. He had long hair and he was wearing jeans. And when they left, his father said to him that Rabbi Chaim said, "This is not a place for you." He says, "What?" He's afraid I'm going to have a with long hair and with jeans. Tell him whatever he tells me to do, I'll do, because I want to be here. He understood this is his place. So his father went back to Rabbi Chaim and said what Reuven says. He says, okay, if he's masking him to cut his hair and to wear normal clothing, they'll accept him into the yeshiva. And he stayed in the yeshiva for a while until he went to the Rebbe. So this younger man told me that Rosh Hashanah he davened at the same table with Rav Reuven Dunen. I don't know what year it was, when he first came to yeshiva in Lud. And he said he did teshuvah. This man cried Rosh Hashanah. I've never in my life seen a man cry like that. He told it to me himself. He says he watched him, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, do teshuvah. You could literally see the inyan at teshuvah that you learn about in Torah and in Chassidus, how a person becomes a whole new human being. Through the teshuvah, he saw it Pasha with his eyes. The end of the story is after being in Lud for about 6 or 7 months, and during that period of time, he haravid in Torah b'tagam b'nacht. He worked unbelievably hard. He literally learned day and night. He came to his mashpia, Reb Shlomo Chaim, and asked him permission to go to the Rebbe. Now we know now, and his book has been published also, the biography of Reb Shlomo Chaim, that the Rebbe had sent him instructions that he should not send to the Rebbe the Bachrim in a rush. Meaning to say that before the Bachrim leave Eretz Yisrael and come to the Rebbe, they should be conditioned. They should be ready to be by the Rebbe. And until then, he should hold them in Eretz Yisrael and be madrech them. Now we all know that Reb Shlomo Chaim was frequently accused of not being sufficiently connected to the Rebbe, not being enough makusher. Because he didn't send us Talmidim, and we only found out in the last 10 years or so, many years after he passed away, that this was actually following an instruction from the Rebbe himself, not to send the Talmidim, which of course he didn't reveal, for whatever reasons. So, Reuven Dunen came to Reb Shlomo Chaim and said, I want to go to the Rebbe. So Reb Shlomo Chaim says to him, normally we're not in a rush to send Bachram to the Rebbe. They have to deserve it, they have to earn it. But in your case, first of all, you're an elder Bach, you're much older. Second of all, you're a Baal Tshuva. And third of all, you're working very, very hard. I think for you it's an idea to go to the Rebbe. And he helped prepare him to go to the Rebbe. The Reb Shlomo Chaim's helping this younger man, Reuven Dunen, go to the Rebbe involved many things. He told him how to prepare himself and how to be present when he's with the Rebbe and so forth. One of the things he told him was that the first yechidas, the first words that the Rebbe says to him, this is Ahiral Kol HaChaim Kulam. It's a lesson for your whole life. So he arrived in New York and he saw the Rebbe and it was love at first sight. He fell in love with the Rebbe. Eventually he had a yechidus. I don't know how long it was, a few days or a few weeks he had a yechidus. And he came into the Rebbe and he gave the Rebbe a note telling the Rebbe some things about him and asking for brachas and so on. So the Rebbe looks at him. The first words out of the Rebbe's mouth were, "Do you know how to drive a tractor?" Now he knows that his mashpia told him that the very first words out of the Rebbe's mouth, it's a lesson for life. And to him the tractor represented evil. The tractor represented all evil came from that tractor. And he had divorced the tractor and forgotten the tractor. And here the Rebbe tells him, the first words out of his mouth, "Do you know how to drive a tractor?" So he became so upset, so distraught, so disturbed, that he burst into uncontrollable sobs. He started to cry. Hysterically. And when he calmed down, the Rebbe told him, and these words are very, very important, the Rebbe says to him, "Why did you come here?" And of course the implication is as follows. You came into me to Yechidus, I asked you a question, you started to cry. What do you want? What did you come here for? So after relaxing himself, collecting himself, Reuven Dunan said to the Rebbe his whole life story. And he writes in a sefer, "I didn't keep any secret. I told the Rebbe every single thing I did." And of course, to be honest with anybody, especially to be honest with the Rebbe, about your Avedis is one of the most disturbing, one of the most difficult, one of the most deep inyanim that a chassid could do. And he writes in his little piece of autobiography, "I told the Rebbe everything, I kept no secrets whatsoever. And when I was all finished, I said to the Rebbe, what I want is, this is how I've lived my life, and I want that the Rebbe should give me a tikkun tshuva. He should teach me how to do tshuva." So the Rebbe thought for a moment, and the Rebbe said to him as follows, quote, "Frier wird man sich einordnen. In Teiro und in Mitzvahs, besimcha v'tuv leivov, danach wird man trachten wegen tshuva." First, we're going to acclimate ourselves. We're going to get ourselves used to learning Torah and doing mitzvahs with joy and gladness of heart, and then later we'll think about tshuva. In other words, don't worry about it now. Now you focus on your relationship with Eibishter. 25 years later, I think it was Tashim Membeis Vav Tishrei, the Rebbe made a hadid in Masechta Yuma, and Rebbe Reuven Dunan, who was then already a senior chassid, felt this was the hemshech to the Yechidus that he had 25 years earlier. The Rebbe 25 years later brought up the subject and gave a hirah and hadrach and diyin tshuva. So after that sikh, he went over to the Rebbe and he said, "L'chaim." This is the story. Now why am I telling this story? I'm telling the story because the key, the crescendo of this maaseh is when this man says to the Rebbe, "I did this and this and this and this and this. I came to you. You should give me a tikkun tshuva. Teach me how to do tshuva." I just want to share one more story before I get to the Maamar. I saw this recently on a film where a Lubavitcher tells a story about going on Merkei Shlichus, I think to Barbados, someplace in the West Indies, Central America. And they landed in the airport, and when they got off the plane, a Yid approached them. And this Yid said, he spoke to them in Yiddish, and he said, "I read in the paper that you're coming, and that your shluchim was a Lubavitcher Rebbe." So he said to them, "I want to tell you who I am. I am a karkafta lo monach tefillin, I never put on tefillin. I don't keep kosher, and I'm a machal Shabbos." And then he concluded, he says, "Azoivi, just since it's true that ein chavush materes ha'atzam yebeso asurim, a person cannot redeem himself from his own prison." So he tells these bacharim that I am not able to help myself considering my situation. But he asked them, "The mon mich bam Lubavitcher Rebbe, mention me by the Rebbe," because he believes that the Rebbe has the koyach to schlep him out of the mud, out of the blotter that he finds himself in. So when they came back to New York, they told the Rebbe, they repeated this to the Rebbe. Eventually this person came to New York, and he was in 770, and the Rebbe told the Gaber, Rabbi Yechel and Gordon Alav Shalom, to give him an aliyah. He got aliyah by the Rebbe's minion. Levi was a Levi. And apparently the end of the story was that he did tshuva. What all these stories share, and there are of course many others, is the desire for tshuva. Tshuva is a part of Yiddishkeit. It's probably a mitzvah. There's a pilpul about it. But there's certainly the idea that a person who chooses to do tshuva. Tshuva means to connect oneself or to reconnect oneself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And of course, like everything else in Yiddishkeit, Teshuvah is no different. Teshuvah you do because you choose to. A person decides that he needs to do Teshuvah to come closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So here is a Maamar, a long Maamar, which will take a while. It's hard to say at the moment how long, but it'll take us a while. And the entire Maamar is about Teshuvah. It's about 3 madregas of Teshuvah, possibly a 4th madrega of Teshuvah. This Maamar Mah Tovu about Teshuvah. In later Maimorim, there's a sugya of Pada B'Sholem. There's Maimorim Pada B'Sholem Tafresh Ayin Ches. You have the same version Pada B'Sholem from the Friedrich Rebbe, and I believe you also have from the Rebbe the same Pada B'Sholem, which is similar ideas to the Maimar we have here, Sur Me'era, Seitev, and Baka Sholem, different madregas of Teshuvah. And my recollection is that the Rebbe actually said this Maimar more than once. So we gave an introduction. Now let's get to the Maimar itself. We're beginning on Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph. The Maimar begins, Matei vo'yalecha yain kiva gamer. That of course Bilam Arasha, in all of his evil, wanted to curse the Jewish people and to be machnes ayin hara to the Jewish people and to i'atzecha, all kinds of ways of hurting the Jewish people, ends up becoming the source for some of the greatest compliments and blessings and prophecies that relate to the Jewish people. This Rasha had all of his curses turned around into blessings, all of his negative turned around into positive. And one of the things that he said was, of course, we all know the Pshutei Shel Mikra, that it says, Vayisa lamidbar panov, he turned to face them in the desert. So Rashi says, Al-Asar, that he wanted to be machnes into the Yidden and ayin hara. The Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos that Bilam Arash has an evil eye, ayin hara. He wanted to bring into Yidden an evil eye. But it also says, Behemshech Mah Tovu, and the idea is that he looked at the Jewish people and he saw midas hatznius. Everybody had a tent, and the entrance of one person's tent was not in the same direction of the entrance to another person's tent. So a person should not be able to see what's going on by the other person. So although he wanted to bring out something negative, he ended up saying, Matei vo'yalecha yankev mishkan esecha Yisrael. So here's a Maimar from the Alter Rebbe on this pasuk, Matei vo'yalecha yankev mishkan esecha Yisrael. And of course, what strikes you immediately, you don't have to learn the Maimar to sort of think what the Maimar is going to discuss. In this pasuk, there's a redundancy. The Jewish people's living accommodations is called oyel and mishkan. Oyel means a tent, and mishkan means a seat, a more permanent resting place. And of course, the Jewish people are identified by the word Yaakov and the word Yisrael. Mah Tovu oyalecha, the tent is Yaakov, and mishkan esecha, which means the seat, the place which is prepared for dwelling, is Yisrael. So the Maimar, which, as I've already told you, we'll talk about Teshuvah, will also address the Yaakov and Yisrael components. Says the Rebbe Lav and Maimar Azal, it says in the Gemara, Kol HaKeri LaAvraham, Avram Eve Belav. Any person who calls Avraham by his prior name Avram is violating a negative commandment. Shenemar, it says in the pasuk, V'lo yikaru et shimcha Avram, that your name will no longer be Avram. And of course, we know where it says in Chassidus. First of all, it says in Chumash that Avram's name was Aleph Beis Reish Mem Avram. And right before the Bris Milah, the Eibishter gave him a hey to his name. And he says, Lo yikaru et shimcha Avram kiyim Avraham. His name is going to be Avraham. And he gave him a bracha. And of course, we learn from this that from now on his name is Avraham and not Avram. Of course, there's so many insights into what was benefited by changing his name from Avram to Avraham. One of them is that until then he was only Avlaram. Rashi says he was a patron, a leader only for one country, Aram, which is where he had come from or passed through. And now it would be Avamein Goyim, a patron for the whole world, for all the nations. It's also brought that Avraham with a hey is Begimati Reish Mem Ches, which is 248. That Avraham, before he became Avraham, and he was Avram, was a balabayas, was a master, was an owner of 243 of his 248 Evarim, 248 limbs. And when the Eibishter gave him the name Avraham, with the additional hey, he became a balabayas also over the eyes and the ears, and so on. It became a balabayas, a master over the remaining 5 organs, limbs. In Chassidus, there's a different explanation. That it says Avram, we learned it in Teirat Eritake, that Avram is Sechel Anela Mikol Raim. Avram, Av means Chochmah. That Avraham Avinu was so smart that he could not communicate with people. He was such a Chocham that he was completely beyond other people's intelligence, which was good for him but not good for people because he couldn't share. Avraham Avinu's job was to teach the world about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to make ordinary Shmei Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'fi Kol Eiv V'Shav, that people should normally say God's name and the word God as if it was a regular part of their language and their lexicon and their social speak and so on. And Avraham Avinu had a difficulty communicating with them because he was such a chacham. When the Eibishter added the letter Hey to his name, he became even a bigger chacham. And how did the additional Hey, which made him a bigger chacham, show itself that he was able to be a mashpia? In other words, he came from a higher madrege to a lower madrege by being even higher. And the Likutei Torah in Parshas Balak, the Rabbi explains this, that when something comes from a higher level, it's able to go to a lower madrege. So the Gemara says, once Avram's name was changed to Avraham, you're not allowed to go back calling him to Avram. Avraham is desirable, is preferred. Avram is not as great, and calling Avram is a chsaron, and the Gemara calls it Eva Belav. And then the Gemara asks the question, Elamayata, if that's the case, that once the Eibush says, Lo Yikara, your name will no longer be Avram. From now on, your name is Avraham, accordingly, Yakei, Yankiv. If somebody calls Yankiv by the name Yankiv, Hachanami, perhaps there should also be Eiver and Alav. Because it says the same thing in Parshas Vayishlach, that Leikare Eid Shimcha Yankiv Kiyim Yisrael Yishmecha, that until now your name was Yankiv, and you will no longer be called Yankiv. From now on you're going to be called Yisrael, and yet everybody calls Yankiv Avinu Yankiv. So the Gemara has the question, how come by Avraham Avinu? Once the name Avraham was given, you're never allowed to say Avram, and by Yankiv Avinu, once the name Yisrael was given, still he's called Yankiv. And for the Gemara, Shiny Hustle. By Yankiv it's different. The Hoder, Ahadre, Kra, B'chuli, because by Yankiv Avinu, the Pasuk, God Almighty in the Chumash, continues to call him Yankiv, even though his name was changed to Yisrael. So by Avraham Avinu, we never find that he should be called Avram again, and therefore you're not allowed. By Yankiv Avinu, we find that even though God Almighty changed his name to Yisrael, he continues to be called Yankiv, and therefore you're allowed to call him Yankiv. Parenthetically, I've shared this with you on previous occasions, I'm going to repeat it now again. There's a Rabbeinu B'Chaye, I think it's in Vayigash, where the Rabbeinu B'Chaye brings proof from Psukim that Yisrael is not only the name of Yankiv, but that Yisrael is also the name of Yitzchak. And moreover, he has one instant where he proves that Yisrael is also the name of Avraham. In other words, that Avraham has a name as Avraham, Yitzchak has a name as Yitzchak, Yankiv has a name as Yankiv, and according to this Rabbeinu B'Chaye, Yisrael is the generic name of all 3 of the others. Even though in Pshutei Shel Mikra, simply put, Yisrael is the name of one man, but Yisrael is also an idea. In other words, the name of Yaakov is Yankiv. The idea of Yankiv is that his name is Yisrael. So of course, this Maimer will now explore these 2 names, Yankiv and Yisrael. They're both names of Yankiv Avinu, and that even after his name is upgraded, so to speak, to Yisrael, he continues to be called Yankiv Avinu. Says the Gemara, the Rebbe V'Inyan, the Pshat is as follows. Why is it that once someone is Avraham, you're not allowed to say Avram, and on the other hand, even after his name is changed to Yisrael, you can still say Yankiv. And the Teretz is, She'ef Shalov V'Yulagil L'Madreges Yisrael. There's no way for a person to go and to reach the step of Yisrael, Ki'im Bagdim Eitchila Midas Madreges Yankiv. The only way for a person to elevate himself to the level of Yisrael, which means to be a balabayis over man and angel, you have to first go through the measure and the step of Yankiv Avinu. So by Avraham, once he becomes Avraham, you can't say Avraham because the person could begin his life on the higher madrege. But Yankov and Yisrael, the reason both names are maintained, they continue to be used, because even after we introduce Yisrael, the only way to reach Yisrael is to pass through the level of Yankov first. And as you'll see in this Maimer, Yankov and Yisrael represent different madregas of Teshuvah. And the Rebbe says, I'm skipping a few words, that the word Yaakov is used in the context of being double. That Esav HaRasha says to Yitzchak Avinu, he fooled me twice. As Becheira si lokach, and then he also took my brachas. Right? Twice, he fooled me twice. And of course, you know what Rashi says, that Yitzchak said, yeah, when was the first time he fooled you? And he was so happy to hear that he fooled him the first time, because since the first time he paid for the brachas, the second time it was legally his. But it says, Ve'akveni zeh pamayim. Now of course, when you learn Chumash, Pshutei Shel Mikra, Esav HaRasha says that Yankov fooled him twice, because this was his way of trying to win his father's heart, that his father should give him a bracha, and so on. But the fact that the Torah records these words of Esav HaRasha means that these words are not just the words of Esav HaGashmi, the physical man Esav, who said, Ve'akveni, he tricked me twice, but the Torah Semes says that the inyan of Esav, that according to Kabbalah and Chassidus is even higher than the inyan of Yankov Avinu, says, Ve'akveni zeh pamayim, he tricked me twice. So this Maimon is going to learn that V'yakvein zeh pamayim means that there's two levels of Yankov. There's going to be three tshuvas. The first tshuva is called Yankov, Maamar Mah Tovu Yankov. The second tshuva will also be called Yaakov, because the V'yakvein is pamayim. And the third tshuva is going to be Yisrael. That's what the Rebbe means with these words. Says the Rebbe, we need to understand this. And this, I suppose, means that we have the name Yaakov. And we have the name Yisrael. And even after the name of Yisrael is used, we still use the name Yaakov. Moreover, there's two madrigas of Yaakov. What are the three levels of Yaakov? Yaakov and then Yisrael. Says the Rebbe, you have to first understand the question, what is the reason the neshama came down into this world? And of course, we all know the reason is that the neshama should later receive reward in Gan Eden. Says the Alter Rebbe, I don't understand. Prior to the neshama's descent in the first place, it was certainly in Gan Eden. Was benefiting from the rays of the Shechina. And the question is, what is the advantage by its descent below, especially since that we know that the neshama could fail, it could make things worse, and so on and so forth. What is benefited by the neshama is Yid Lamat. And he says, there's all kinds of answers to this question. You know, when I was growing up, I heard this from one of my mashpiyim. I can't remember who, but it must have been a mashpiyah, because it's a Chassidishe word, who told us when you learn Likutei Torah, you come across an interesting phenomenon. Alter Rebbe begins a Maimer, and within a few lines he goes to the standard question. What's the question of questions? Lama yarda neshama lamata. Why did neshama come into this world? And then there'll be a whole Maimer, there'll be a whole explanation. Some Maimarim will tell you you read it tzerech aliyah. Some Maimarim will tell you did it b'tachtainim. This Maimer you'll see momentarily is going to tell you tshuva and all kinds of other answers. Then you turn the page. You start a new Maimer, the Maimer begins, a few questions, Lama yarda neshama lamata. Alter Rebbe keeps asking the same question over and over again. So I heard once one of my mashpiyim, the pshat in this is, that Alter Rebbe asks a question, why did the neshama come into this world? And he gives an answer. The answer is scholarly, intellectual, and true, but unsatisfying. Because when the Alter Rebbe asked, why did the neshama come into this world, it's a hatz kasha. The heart is asking. The pain, the suffering, the risk, the sakona that is involved in the neshama coming into this world, emotionally doesn't justify it. So you have a kop teretz to a hatz kasha. You're giving an intellectual, a scholarly, a Torah answer to an emotional question, to a neshama answer. So you ask the question, you give the answer, and for some reason you're not satisfied. So you turn the page, you ask it again. So you ask the question very emotionally, very passionately. Then you give a scholarly, Torah, intellectual answer. So you understand the teretz, but you're not happy. You turn the page, it's again and again the same kasha. Because even though we're giving so many answers to the questions, the question always is going to remain, how do you justify a neshama coming into this world? So the Rebbe says there's many answers to this question of Lama Yod Neshama Lamata. And he says over here, having heard all the answers, let me tell you the truth. The real answer is, One hour in this life doing tshuva and good deeds is more than all of Elam Haba. And this is why the neshama came lamat. Now this itself, these words, Yafa Shah Achas, B'tshuva Maisem Tevim, that it's better, it's prettier, 1 hour in tshuva and good deeds in this world, more than all Chai Elam Haba, also has different interpretations. Tanya chapter 31, for example, where the Alter Rebbe says, what does it mean, tshuva, maisim tevim, where you're doing mitzvahs as tshuva. You'll see this later in this maimer also. You're doing mitzvahs, but you're not doing mitzvahs to meet an obligation, because you've met your obligations. You're doing mitzvahs because of the concept, which is found in the Gemara, of kol yama b'tshuva. You want to spend every minute returning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He brings the mashal of a Ben HaMelech, who was a chavush, and he bebeis ha'asurim, and teichen achar arechayim, and he comes home, Love of HaMelech. So even though he's dirty and he's smelly and he's full of diseases, they celebrate his return home even though he's unclean. And the point is that he's home, so you can celebrate it, but there's still work that needs to be done that continues after that celebration. Similarly, there's a concept that every minute of a person's life he's doing tshuva, and that's the tshuva, maisim tevim, means maisim tevim that are for tshuva. In other words, mitzvahs that are returning to the Eibishter. There are other explanations of that pasuk, including the very idea of mitzvahs. Begashmis, doing mitzvahs is the biggest thing. But in this case, when this Maimeh Chazal is quoted, Yofa Shah Achas B'tshuva Ma'isem Teiv Be'elam Hazeh, the focus is on the word tshuva. And the Rebbe says, or Maimeh Chazal says in the Gemara, V'markem Shebal Tshuva Eimdim, in the place where it's right, Bal Tshuva stands, Tzadikim Gemurim Einim Yechelim La'am B'Cham, perfect Tzadikim are not able to stand there. Now, of course, this is a Gemara in Brachas, and the Gemara brings two opinions, whether a Bal Tshuva is higher or a Tzadik is higher. And the Gemara, of course, doesn't paskin. The Rambam paskins, like the Shita that holds that a Bal Tshuva is higher than a Tzadik, but the Rambam also adds something else. The Gemara says, B'mokam shebal Tshuva eimdim tzadikim gemurim einim eimdim sham, which means that where a Bal Tshuva stands, the Tzadik doesn't stand, and the Rambam adds the words, ein yechelim la'amid sham, are not able to stand. So this is the Rambam's version of this Gemara, that the highest inyan is true. So the Rebbe says, V'hinei, what do we mean when we say that the true Tirut, the true answer to this question, that the reason for Yiris and Shamalamata is tshuva? So he says as follows: Haneshama is Kedem Yiridasan Lagu of Hem Bevad, they Tzadikim Gemur. A neshama before it descends into this world was a perfect tzaddik. So the question becomes, if before the neshama was born it was a perfect tzaddik, exactly what is gained by the neshama coming lamata? And the teretz is Achzeh Huwa Yisen. This is the advantage. Shalahem of the neshama b'yiridas and beguf, as they come down into a body, shenasim bechinas ba'ilei tshuva, they become the madrega of tshuva. They started out as tzadikim, and yirid tzedech aliyah, they become about tshuva. Says the Rebbe Oz, heim lamayla mitzadikim. They are now raised up higher than the madrega of tzadikim, and this is the purpose for the Eibishter created the world, to bring the neshamas down into this world, and they should go back to their earlier condition. It should be ba'ilei tshuva. Now I want to share something with you. In Tafshin Lamed Ches, in 1977, the Rebbe had a medical episode. He had a heart attack. And of course, the Rebbe had an incredible recovery from that episode, from that event. And of course, the Nesiyas of the Rebbe continues. But there are things that the Rebbe spoke that winter, after his recovery, that seemed to be, so to speak, like Chedushim, new ideas. Now, obviously, they're not entirely new, but that winter there's a Maimer of Simchas Torah, I think, or a Maimer of Noach, and I think also Padeh B'Sholem, it is Kislev, where the Rebbe spoke this idea that we have here in this Maimer, that the Yiridus and Neshama Lamata, the reason for the Neshama descent is before it's the Tzaddik and then it's a Baal Tshuva. And the Rebbe explained over there that the concept of Tzaddik and Baal Tshuva does not even require Avedis. The Neshama is one with the Eibishter. The Baal Tshuva is also one with the Eibishter. The difference is only the tzaddik is one with the Eibishter because he never left, and the Baal Tshuva is one with the Eibishter simply because he's returning. And although before the neshama came lamata, it had a koyach for tshuva, but there's a difference between koyach and payah, between potential and actual. The neshama leaves and returns to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even if there's no avedus, that's the inat tshuva. And this concept of tshuva makes the Baal Tshuva higher than a tzaddik. And this Maimed is going to discuss tshuva. Like I told you before, we're going to have 3 different tshuvas. And tshuva bepashtas, tshuva basically means tshuva from avedus. But the concept of tshuva is we separate from the Eibishter and we reunified with him, even though before we were one with him, and now we continue to be one with him. And how could you be more one with the Eibishter than one with the Eibishter? And this is the Liadi Aliyah being a Baal Tshuva, not a tzaddik. So if you skip the parenthesis, it begins, V'hine yesh shleisha minei tshuva. There's going to be 3 madregas of tshuva. And in Mitzvah Hashem, of the next few classes, we'll do each class 1 tshuva, and then we'll continue learning the Maimed.